Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Nidhi Agarwal and I am working as Associate Professor at Maharaja Agrawal College of Physiotherapy. I hope I am audible to all of you, and from here I am starting to taking a talk on adult neurological examination. So, like any other examination, we have to begin from taking the demographic data and the history part. So, I'm not going into the detail of these two things because that will be too time consuming, and I'll try to keep it brief so that you can understand and be attentive from the neurological point of view. So, straight away coming to the examination part. From a neurological examination point of view, first we have to categorize our examination into certain things which are categorized first into mental status, means that we have to check for the mental status of a person. We need to check the cognitive function of a person. That is also a part of your higher mental function examination itself. Then we have to check for the cranial nerves, and then we check on the motor examinations, sensory examination, your reflex testing, your coordination and balance testing, and gait. So first of all, we'll start with the checking of the awareness or the consciousness level. The consciousness level is checked basically by your Glasgow Coma Scale, which was given by Tesdale and Jennett in 1974, and it got revised in 2014 and 18. So we are going to see the latest version that is provided in the 2018 concept. So we have three categories in it. One is eye opening, second is verbal response, and third is best motor response. So for checking the eye response, when we approach the patient, we need to see whether the patient is opening the eyes spontaneously or not. Spontaneously means that when we are approaching the patient or when we are standing at the side of the patient, so whether patient is actually opening the eyes spontaneously on its own or not. So if it is like that, then you grade it as 4. The maximum grading for this is eye response is 4. Then when you are speaking to the patient, okay, so when you are calling out his name or you are asking something and at that time the person is opening the eyes, so then you say it as 3. Now the patient is not opening the eyes on these two things, so then you give the painful response. So the painful response is either given in the supraorbital pressure or the nail bed pressure. So what you are doing is you are giving the nail bed pressure or you are giving the supraorbital pressure. So this is the painful stimulus, and the third painful stimulus that you can use is the trapezius pinch. This is the pinch that you can use for a painful stimulus. Other stimulus are not advocated in case of a neurological patient. And if the patient opens the eyes in such response, then you grade it as 2. And if the patient is not giving any response, then it is graded as 1. The other thing that we check is the verbal response. Now in case of verbal response, if the patient is oriented to time and place, means you ask the person that what time is it. So the patient is able to differentiate whether it is the daytime or the night time. More precisely, you don't have to go by the choice of the time, that whether it is 2:30 or whether it is 1:30. The patient has to just answer it is day or night, and if the patient is more defined like it is afternoon or morning or evening, then it is better. So you grade it as 5. Then if the patient is not oriented, patient is confused in these two things, time and place. Sorry, I forgot about the place. So for the place, if the patient is able to tell that yes, I am in hospital, I am in a clinic, then the patient is oriented about the place where the patient is lying or is getting examined. Then you grade it as 5 because you are checking for the orientation, time and place. Now if the patient is confused in these two things, then you grade it as 4. If the patient is only making inappropriate words which are non-purposeful, patient is talking irrelevantly, then you grade it as 3. if the patient is not even talking, not even uttering any words, but is only making any sounds. It can be grunting, moaning, whimpering, any kind of sound if the patient is making, but it is incomprehensible, you cannot understand, it is non-purposeful, then you grade it as 2. And if the patient is not giving any response, then it is graded as 1. Now sometimes what happens, patient has undergone tracheostomy. So either you write down non-testable or you write down tracheostomy done. Got it? So the next thing that we see is the best motor response. You approach the patient is obeying the commands, then you grade it as 6. Okay, so the best thing that patient can do is you ask the patient to lift the arm or move the legs, but you need to be sure that the patient does not have any paralysis on that side. So you need to work apart from that. Okay, so whatever movement that is being possible according to the condition of the patient, that is being considered, and you ask the patient to obey that particular command. Then the next response that you check is the localization of the pain. So usually the pressures preferred here is your supraorbital pressure and the trapezius pinch. So what the patient do in such case, that patient tries to move the arm up to the chin or beyond the chin to prevent yourself from putting that painful pressure. Then you grade it as 5. The third response that we see from the patient is the withdrawal response. Now here there is no localization from the patient side, but patient is just trying to pull himself apart from that response. So that will be a global response. It can be in any form, but it will not be generalized. Localization is done by the patient, and then you grade it as 4. Then the next, when you go to the patient, so you observe certain abnormal posturing of the patient. So the next posturing that you can see in the patient is the abnormal flexion. So abnormal flexion means it is also known as decorticate posturing. In this, what you see is the abnormal flexed posturing of the upper limbs, whereas the lower limbs are extended. Extended means the hip is in relative neutral position if lying on bed, knee is extended and ankle is plantar flexion. Okay, so this is an decorticate posturing or the abnormal flexion. The next, and you grade it as 3. And then next is your decerebrate or the abnormal extensor posturing. In this, what happens is that the patient assumes the extensor posturing. The posture will be something like this. Okay, so the upper limb will also be extended and the lower limb will also be extended. In both the reasons, upper limb and lower limb, we will see the extensor response of the patient. Then we grade it as 2. And if the patient is giving no response, then you grade it as 1. So depending on this, we can comment on the conscious level of the patient, whether the patient is alert, drowsy, or in the state of stupor, obtundation. So there are definite definitions of all these terminologies of consciousness. But here I am going to tell you that the minimum score that one can have is 3, which means either the patient is in coma or the patient is dead. And the maximum score that one can have is 15, which means that the patient is in normal state. Okay, and in between these 3 we categorized into mild, moderate and severe form of injuries. Now this was the GCS which has been followed since 1974. In 2018, another score was added to it, which was pupil reactivity to the light. Now if both the pupil are reactive to light, then nothing is being deducted from this score. I hope you know. If not, then I'll tell you. The pupil reactivity is seen. A torch is shown in the light and you need to see whether the pupil is getting constricted or not. If both the pupil are reactive to light, then you do not deduct any score. But if one pupil is reactive, you deduct 1 out of the total score which is being scored in the GCS. And if both the pupils are unreactive, then you deduct 2. Okay, so this is the GCS, this is the Glasgow Coma scale that we perform for the patient to make out their consciousness. level. After this consciousness level, we need to check on the behavior and the emotional status of the patient. Now, why we need to see the behavior and the emotional status of the patient? Because if the patient is in heightened state of activity or patient is in a stupor or drowsiness, then it becomes very difficult to perform the rest of the examination. So you need to concentrate first on the behavior and the emotional status of the person. So you need to see whether the patient is responsive, whether the patient is cooperative enough to understand you, to follow your commands, or to even understand what you are saying, comprehending and recepting. Then behavior, whether the patient is drowsy, depressed, unusually calm, unusually anxious, not willing to do anything, so that is his anxious state. Or if the patient has emotional lability syndrome. Emotional lability is that the patient has spontaneous crying or spontaneous laughter, or patient is being fearful of something. So all these things are considered before going into the actual examination. Then after this, we start working on the cognitive abilities of the person. First of all, we need to check on the attention of a patient. Attention is being checked by asking the patient, or when you were evaluating the patient on GCS, or when you were observing the behavior, or when you were seeing the patient interacting with the family members, you can make out that time itself that whether the patient is being attentive to the particular stimulus and registering it or not. Okay, so basically there are four kind of attentions: sustained attention, selective attention, alternating attention, and divided attention. Sustained means that the person is being focused on certain stimulus and is not drifting to the other parts or other things. Okay. Selective means that the person is able to suppress the surrounding stimuluses and is focusing on the one. Means there are distractions present around and the subject is focusing on the relevant topic. Okay. Then third is your alternating, that the patient is engaged into two or more types, but here we are not seeing the alternating and divided attention because that is a higher level function, but we should know that this is a part of a neurological examination. If the patient is coming to a clinic, then that patient is appropriate to test for this kind of attention also. So if the patient is doing 2 or 3 tasks simultaneously, then the patient should alternate between these tasks by giving the due amount of attention to each task. Okay. Then we have divided attention. Divided attention means that simultaneously we are performing 2 or 3 tasks. There was a very common example, I don't know whether you have seen it or not. A lady is driving a car while putting the makeup. So that is a kind of an example in which divided attention is seen, that the female is driving also and is doing her makeup also. So that is a kind of a divided attention. The next thing that we have to check is the speech. Now why we want to check for the speech? Because we want to know whether whatever we are telling the patient is understanding that, or whatever is being asked by the patient, whether patient can answer that question or not. So if there is loss of speech, then it is known as aphasia. And you have to know that aphasia is different from dysarthria. Okay, so aphasia is basically because your central nervous system lesion, and dysarthria is because of your peripheral nervous system lesion. From the peripheral musculature, the dysarthria occurs. So basically aphasias are Broca's or Wernicke's or global. These are the neurological terms. If we talk in certain simpler terms, then one is motor aphasia, one is sensory aphasia, and one is global aphasia. Motor aphasia means the Broca's center of the brain is affected, but clinically the patient will not be able to utter, will not be able to speak. Means the word formulation, like I am speaking right now, the patient will not be able to do that. Patient can understand what I am speaking to that person, but definitely patient cannot answer it back. Okay, so this is your motor aphasia or expressive aphasia, and in neurological terms it is also known as Broca's aphasia. Then the next is your receptive aphasia or sensory aphasia. Now what I am speaking to the patient will not be able to comprehend, patient will not be able to understand. Okay, so the patient will not be getting whatever I'll be speaking to the patient. Although patient can utter words, but we know when the patient cannot understand, so patient will be talking something which may not be asked to the patient. So this is a Wernicke's aphasia or sensory aphasia or receptive aphasia. And if both these functions are affected, then this is known as the global aphasia. I hope you understood why we are checking for this speech function first, so that we know whether the patient is going to be helpful while answering the questions or not, whether the patient will be giving us the relevant information or not, or the whatever the movements has been asked by the patient, whether the patient can actually understand those questions or not, or those commands. Then the next thing that we check in cognitive function is memory. We know memory, that we register to some stimulus, we retain it in our brain and we recall it for the later use. Okay, so there is a process of encoding, storage and recall in it. So basic for the memory examination, we go for immediate memory examination, short term and long term. For the immediate memory examination, what the simplest thing that we can do is that we can tell random numbers or random words to the patient. Like I say sky, car and tree. And we ask the patient to repeat the same words within 1 to 2 seconds. So that is a immediate memory, checking of immediate memory. Checking of short-term memory can be asked. You can ask the patient to say what has happened in the previous evening, what he ate in the previous evening. If the patient is coming to the clinic, then what the patient do on the previous evening. So certain kind of questions that you can ask to check for the short-term memories. Then for checking of the long-term memories, you can ask the person to refer back to the long-term events that has happened in the past, like his birthdays, any important events, any prizes, any schooling things he want to tell. So you need to cross-check those things with the patient party, so that whether the patient is telling the right thing or not. Why I am telling this thing, because sometimes what happens with the patient of neurological injuries is that they have memory gaps in their memories. Okay, so they have lack of certain things in their memory, for which they make up their own stories. They fill those gaps. They don't recall all the things, and they have memory gaps in their talks and in their events, and then they make up their own stories to fill up those gaps, and this thing is known as confabulation. Okay, so this is also a neurological event, so that's why you want to cross-check those things with the patient party. Then other things that we can check is the calculation abilities, problem solving abilities, and thinking, abstract thinking, insight, foresight. So that is depending on the educational level of the patient. Suppose if the patient is not educated enough, so you can ask the person to do a simple calculation, 5 plus 6 kitna hota hai. Okay, so this is the way that you can manipulate and change your examination according to the patient. If the patient is qualified enough, then you can have your own set of calculations. You can ask that do multiplication of certain numbers, not like very big ones, but the general ones you can ask them to do. Then you have your problem solving. You can have the simple question like we have 4 people and we have 20 apples. How can we divide those 20 apples into 4 people? So these are the kind of questions that we can put to the patient for problem solving. Then the insight and the foresight, that you want to know from the patient what does he feel about the body. This is the same kind of thing we check in the perceptual functions, like body scheme and body image. Body image is how does the patient feel about its own body? What is the status of the patient in his own eyes or in his own words regarding his disease, regarding his function, regarding his dependency, everything. Body scheme is where you ask the patient to relate where the upper limb is located, where the lower limb is located, which is right side, which is left side, what are the different kind of fingers that we are having. So patient has disorientation or confusion regarding these issues, and that's why they are not able to judge the body scheme, that the head has to be first, then it has to be neck, then your torso, upper limb, lower limb. So they will be lacking the idea of the whole body. Postural model of the body will be distorted, and this is the way you can ask them to draw the body structure. That is another way of checking this perceptual deficit. Then you have a whole list of perceptual deficit in which you check for your check for the distance perception, that how much distance they can perceive, that whether it is a short distance or a long distance. Depth perception, कितना depth वो perceive कर पा रहे हैं. So you can ask them to put something in the pegboards. There are different pegboards for this depth perception thing. So you can perform all these tests on the patient and know the response of the patient. Figure ground discrimination is affected. Like you can give them a set of tray and you put 10 items in it. And suppose there is a pen, there is a mobile, there is a key, and you ask them to take out the key. It becomes very difficult for them to take out that key because they cannot dissociate what all items are there. They all look very similar kind. They cannot make out that which one to take out. So that is again a perceptual deficit. Then there are certain perceptual deficits which are commonly seen in dominant and non-dominant hemispheres. Basically the parietal lobe, which is agnosias and apraxias. Agnosia is patient has perfect sensations. Their vision will be intact, their hearing will be intact, their tactile sense will be intact, but still they are not able to utilize that sensations to perceive what it is being asked. For example, the patient is having visual agnosia. There are three kinds of agnosias primarily: visual agnosia, tactile agnosia, and auditory agnosia. Okay, so when you ask the patient to see something, you are showing a key and you ask the patient that what it is and how it is used. So patient will not be able to tell that what it is and what is the use. Whereas as soon as you give that thing into the hand of the patient, patient will immediately say that this is a key and it has a purpose in locking and unlocking of the lock. Okay, so this is visual agnosia, that on vision the patient was not able to tell that what was it. Then similarly we have tactile agnosia. In this you ask the patient to close the eyes and then you give something in the hand. For example, key itself. So on touching the key, on manipulating in the hand, the patient will not be able to tell that what it is. Okay, whereas when you ask the patient to open the eyes, immediately patient can tell that this is a key and what's its use. Then we have auditory agnosia, like you ring a bell. So the patient will not, with the eyes closed obviously, so you ring a bell and the patient will not be able to tell that what it is. If the hearing is preserved, that we'll see in the cranial nerve that the hearing has to be checked first. Okay, so when you are ringing a bell, the patient will not be able to tell that this is the sound of a bell. Whereas when the patient sees it or touch it, the patient can tell it very comfortably. So this was the agnosias. Now coming to the apraxias. Apraxia is that basically patient has full voluntary control. Patient has no motor deficit, motor control is there, but still the patient is not able to do skillful voluntary task. Voluntary effort is there, muscle strength is there, control is there, but still the patient is not able to perform the skillful systematic task. Okay, like I say, the patient can have ideational apraxias, common ones, ideational apraxias, idiomotor apraxias, constructional apraxias and dressing apraxias. So basically what happens in idiomotor, that like we do brushing as a part of a normal routine in the morning time, so they can also perform those routine tasks, but on command the patient will not be able to do. So what you can do to the patient is that you can ask them, show how a brushing is done. So the patient will not be able to do it, but the patient party will be telling that he is doing his brush on his own every day morning. His routine is there and he is doing that on his own. So you know that is a kind of an apraxia where the patient is in the classification of ideomotor type. Whereas the ideational type is the patient is not doing on command and is also not constructing the plan in the automatic form also. Means the patient is not doing in the morning routine also, or as an automatic form also the patient is not able to do it. Then another is your dressing apraxia. So if you hand over a shirt to the patient will not be able to visualize that where this piece of cloth is to be worn. Maybe he'll wear it on the head, maybe he'll wear it in the lower limbs, but he will not be able to relate to it that where is to be worn. Okay. For the constructional apraxia, you can ask them to draw some geometrical pattern. Okay. So the basic one, square or circle or triangle. So the patient will not be able to draw the number of lines it has, number of corners it has, number of edges it has. The patient will not be able to construct that geometric pattern again on its own. Okay, so this is the apraxia, constructional apraxia. These are only few. There are whole list of cognitive and perceptual functions that we check. So if any of you is interested in knowing more, because of the time constraint here I am not being too elaborative on all the perceptual functions, but I am telling you the most common one. Okay, we have Gerstmann syndrome, we have dyscalculia, we have dyslexia, and we have different protocol of assessing all these things. Now coming to my next is the cranial nerve examination. We all know we have 12 pair of cranial nerves, and they are either sensory or motor or both sensory and motor. So the first one is your olfactory nerve. Olfactory nerve is for smell, and in this what thing we take is should be pleasant, should not be pungent, should not initiate the sneezing response in case of a patient. So what we usually do, we close the nostril of one side and the thing is brought near the nostril and asked to sniff. Now what the patient has to say, the patient has to identify what it is, whether the patient can smell anything, and if yes, then what it is, identify the smell. So the patient can have complete loss, patient can have abnormal sensations. Abnormal means the patient can take it as a pungent smell, so you call it as cacosmia, or the patient can have parosmia, abnormal feeling, or you can call it as altered sensations. The patient is not able to tell what it is. Okay, so this is for your olfactory. Then second nerve is your optic nerve. So in optic nerve you check for your visual acuity, which is usually done by an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, and there they check using the Snellen's charts and Jaggers chart whether the patient is in the hypermetropia or myopic. Okay, myopic or hypermetropic. So all these things is checked. Then the second thing that we can check is the field of vision. Field of vision is also being checked by an optometrist or an ophthalmologist using the gold standard technique, perimetry, or the Goldmann's perimeter. But in our clinical setting, we take the confrontation method. Confrontation method means I am the therapist, I am closing one eye, the patient is sitting in front of me and the patient is closing the opposite side of eye. So if I am closing my left eye, the patient has to close the right eye. And then we'll take our hand into the field of vision, the maximum field of vision, and from all the planes we have to bring the hand or the finger or the hooded pin into all the dimensions. Okay, and we need to see whether the patient is having any blur vision, whether the patient is having any kind of blind spot, whether the patient is having any loss of vision in that thing, and till what side it is seen, because patient can have nasal field loss or temporal field loss. So we need to see that whether the patient is able to see in all the fields or not, and this has to be checked on both the sides. Then in all this thing we again check for the color vision also, like acuity, we have to check for the color also, and that is using your Ishihara chart. The most important one are the pupil size, shape, irregularity. Then you need to see whether the pupil of both the sides are equal, whether they are round or irregular, whether they are reactive to light or not. So reactivity to a light is a very essential thing that we have to check in case of cranial nerve. So we have three reflexes, light reflexes. One is direct light reflex. So in direct light reflex, what do? We shine the torch, we shine the light in one eye and look for the constriction of the pupil in the same eye. So we are going to shine the light in this eye and we are going to look for the constriction of the pupil in the same eye. Then we have consensual light reflex. Consensual light reflex means you are going to occlude the vision. So the occlusion has to be like that the light that you are shining in that eye should not go in this eye, and when you are shining the light in this eye, you are checking for the constriction of the pupil in the other eye. So this is your consensual light reflex, that you are checking for the constriction of the pupil in the other eye. Then you have accommodation reflex. So there you are checking the ability of the person to change the size of the pupil from the constriction to dilatation to constriction. So for that, what you can ask the patient to focus on certain nearby object, okay, and you look, it has to be at such a level, that the eyes are open, okay, and then you are asking the patient to focus on something far away object and then again near one. So there you can see the constricted and dilated response. Like when the object is near, the patient pupil will be constricted. When the patient is focusing on some far away thing, then the patient is having the dilated pupil, and again when it is brought near, then again patient is having constricted pupil. Okay, so this is about your optic nerve. Then oculomotor, third, fourth and sixth. These cranial nerves are checked together. Third, fourth and sixth. Oculomotor, trochlear and abducens. In this, what do we see? We see the movement of the eyeballs and the conjugate movements of the eyeballs. So we know that the eyes move in a 6 patterns. Medial rectus, lateral rectus, inward movement, outward movement, out, in and out, in and down, out and up, and out and out. Okay, so we have superior rectus, superior oblique, like superior oblique, inferior oblique, superior rectus and inferior rectus, lateral rectus and medial rectus. So we need to check for all these functions. So what we are doing in this, that we are focusing on the hand or the fingertip and taking it in the direction this, outwards, out and in and out. Okay, so we are checking for the movements in all the compartments, whether both the sides are moving in a conjugately manner together. Okay, sometimes in squint, one eye is moving but the other eye is not moving. So there are certain other conditions, different conditions which are there, which are involved because of the optic nerve pathways are there. So that field is affected, and because of that there are certain things which are affected. And because of the paralysis of the certain muscles, the muscles which are supplied by these 3 nerves, they can be paralyzed because of the tumor, because of the trauma. So you need to see whether the patient is able to move the eyes in all the directions or not. Then the thing that we observe is the nystagmus. When the patient is doing the movements, we need to see for the nystagmus, that is the involuntary movements. Okay, so involuntary movements, like we see in case of Parkinson's and cerebellum, we have tremors. So this is the tremors in the eyes. You have the involuntary movements of the eyeball when the patient is fixing the gaze or when the patient is shifting the vision from one part to the other, then the eyeball starts to shake, and this is known as nystagmus. There are different kind of nystagmus: pendular nystagmus, horizontal nystagmus, vertical nystagmus, and it is associated with each different kind of pathologies. Sometimes the nystagmus has a fast phase, slow phase, means in one direction it is fine and in one direction it is correcting. So one can have the regular amplitude. So it has different kind of things, but precisely for this moment of time, I'll tell you, nystagmus you need to see for the shakiness of the eyeball. Then you need to see, which you checked in optic nerve itself, that whether the patient is having any double vision, which is diplopia. Okay, and the other thing that you can see is the ptosis. Ptosis is your drooping of eyelid. Suppose this is the eyelid, so you will see the patient eyelid will be like this only. So the patient will not be able to open it. So that is because of your levator palpebrae superioris paralysis, that the patient is not able to lift the eyelid. Okay, like the eyes will not be opened full. This is your ptosis. Then coming to your next nerve, which is the fifth nerve and is trigeminal. In that you check the sensation on three divisions on the face. Ophthalmic is this, maxillary is this, and this is mandibular. Okay, this is ophthalmic, maxillary and mandibular. And you check for the superficial sensations, means touch, temperature and pressure. These three things are checked on these three divisions, and you know whether the sensory function of the trigeminal nerve is intact or not. Then you check for the muscles. So two muscles are tested, masseter muscles and temporalis muscle. For the masseter muscle, for both the muscles, what you are doing is you are clenching your teeth and you are checking for the muscle bulge. Here at the end of the mandible is your masseter muscle here and your temporalis muscle here. Okay, so this is for the testing of your masseter and temporalis muscles. You have to clench your teeth. Then there are two reflexes that you check, is the corneal reflex and the jaw jerk. So for the corneal reflex, what you can take is the cotton whisk and you touch the cornea. The eyelashes should not be touched and any other part should not be touched. Ideally, you should touch the cornea and look for the blinking response. So this is the ideal corneal reflex. Then another is a jaw jerk, which is also a deep reflex. So what do you do is you put a finger or just on the mentalis muscle, you tap it. So you ask the patient to slightly open the mouth and tap. Okay, so this is not to be done with a finger, just for explanation I am showing it like that. It has to be done with a hammer, reflex hammer, and then the response will be slight closing of the mouth. But it is usually observed in case of spasticity. In rarest of the rare cases, it is seen. Like if the patient has upper motor neuron lesion or patient has hypertonicity, then you can have the very clear closing of the mouth. Then you have your facial nerve. So facial nerve, we have different facial muscles, so we have to check for the functions of those muscles. Eyebrow raising, frowning, eye closing, smiling, puckering, pouting. Okay, so all those functions are to be checked. Then you need to see for the synkinesis of the actions. Synkinesis means that whenever you are doing certain movement of the face, whether the other part of the face is also moving. Like when you ask the patient to smile, whether the eye is getting closed, when you are closing the eyes, whether the lip is being deviated. So when certain actions are being performed together, then it is known as the synkinesis. Okay, then other thing that we see is the Bell's phenomena. What happens in this phenomena is whenever you ask the patient to close the eyes, then if Bell's phenomena is there, the eyeball roll upward. You will see only the white sclera and you will not see anything else. The eyeball will roll upward first. I cannot demonstrate that obviously. Okay, so you need to look for the Bell's phenomena. This was the motor part. For the sensory part, how it is checked, that you check the sensations of the tongue. So you can have the different solutions, sugar solution, salt solution, bitter and sour, and you can have different cards in front of you. So the tip of the tongue is for the sweet, the tip and the sides are for the salty, the the bitter is for the base and the back is for the sour. Okay. So when you take the solution and you, with the help of a cotton swab or an earbud, you dip it in that solution and you put it on the areas and can ask the patient that how the taste is. If the patient is having any sweet sensation, the patient is going to tell sweet or whatever it is. Okay, so this is the way we are going to check on the facial nerve. Then next is our 8th cranial nerve, which is vestibulocochlear nerve. It has two parts, vestibular part and cochlear part. Cochlear part is for hearing and vestibular part is for maintaining balance and eye nystagmus. Okay, so for the cochlear part, we first whisper something in the ear. Okay, we go near the ear and whisper in both the ears and ask the patient to identify that whether the patient is feeling the same amount of intensity is there or not. There are different numbers for low pitch sound and high pitch sound. Like we have 26 and 68 for high tones and 42 and 100 for low tones. Okay, so that we are going to whisper in the ear and find out whether the patient is able to hear it or not. If means the next step would be performing the Rennie's and the Weber's test. So we know by science that the air conduction is 2 times better than the bone conduction. So what we are going to do, we are going to take the tuning fork of either 256 Hz or 512 Hz, strike it, put it in front of external auditory meatus. Okay, so if the tuning fork is there, that is being striked and put it here, and if the patient is hearing, we are going to put it on the mastoid process behind the ear. Okay, we are going to put it here, and as soon as the patient stops hearing the sound, we are going to bring back this tuning fork in front of the ear to find out whether the patient is still hearing it or not. And at the same time, we are also calculating the seconds, because we have to calculate whether it is 2 times or 3 times, 2 times or 1 times, not 3 times. That is not possible. So we have to check for that, and then we have to calculate whether the patient is having the conducive deafness or sensory neural deafness. Conductive deafness means that the patient is having either middle ear disease or patient is having sensory neural component deafness. Okay, so this was for your Rennie's test. Next is your Weber's test. Strike the tuning fork, put it on the vertex, and you want to see whether the patient is able to hear clearly in both the ears and equally. Okay, if patient is able to hear equally in both the ears, then it is fine. If there is conductive deafness or sensory neural deafness, then there will be a variation in the intensities. I can tell, but here I have a lot of things to tell you. So if any one of you is interested in to know the details, please WhatsApp me. I'll try my level best to clear all your doubts regarding these topics. Okay, so this was for your hearing part. Then one thing that you want to ask to the patient, whenever the patient is hearing something, whether the patient is hearing tinnitus. Tinnitus is tee sound. Okay, like the telephone bell is ringing, such kind of sound is there in the ear always, and it is quite irritating. So it becomes very difficult for the patient to put focus on any of the things. So you need to confirm whether the patient is having any kind of tinnitus is there. Okay, this is for your cochlear part. Now for the vestibular part, you can perform 2 tests. First of all, you need to ask for the patient whether the patient is having any complaint of falling, vertigo means chakkar, or if the patient is having any pass pointing. Pass pointing means that they want to touch if this is the target and they want to touch it, but they go beyond it. So that is known as past pointing. So are they having this, or there is fear of falling or the chances of getting off balance. Okay, then there are 2 tests which are being performed, rotational chair test and caloric testing. Rotational chair test is not advocated as such, because you need to rotate the patient and then you need to look for the response of nystagmus, which may get missed with your open eyes. So you need the expert instruments for it. So sometimes what do? We do caloric testing. So in that caloric testing, what we can do is that we can have the patient lying in lying down position, head flexed to 30 degrees, and we start putting the water in the external auditory meatus. Okay. If the patient has some perforation, we can have the infusion of the air, and as a normal response, patient should have nystagmus, and then in both the sides you check for the response and the delays. If there is no response, that also indicates pathology. If the response is very short-lived, then also it indicates pathology. So that is again in the detailed version. Then you have your glossopharyngeal and the vagus nerve, which is your 9th and 10th. So in this, basically you check for the sensation of posterior 1/3 of tongue, and it becomes very difficult to check for the posterior 1/3 of the tongue because you have to go beyond very deep, and it actually elicits your gag reflex. So what do? The ideal way is using a galvanic current of 2 to 4 milliamperes, which produces a metallic taste, and patient has to identify whether the patient can sense that taste. Okay, otherwise what you can do, you can just check on the touch sensation. So you touch the tongue, back of the tongue or the palate, or you look at the shape and the size of the uvula. You look for any deviation of uvula, and you can look for the gag reflex when you are touching at the back of the tongue or on the upper margins. Then it actually elicits the gag reflex. Gag reflex means as if you are going to vomit. So you need to look for these signs. Apart from it, you can have these swelling issues. You can ask the patient whether the patient is able to swallow properly or not, or whether the patient is having any kind of hoarseness of voice. Okay. And then your 11th nerve is there. Then it is spinal accessory, which actually supplies your HCM muscle and your upper trapezius. So you look for the resisted rotations of the neck and shrugging of the shoulder. So these two things are checked. Then your hypoglossal nerve, which is concerned with your tongue. So you need to look at the size, shape, position and the movements of the tongue. You also need to look at the size, whether the tongue is hypertrophied or wasted, or whether there are any involuntary movements are there in the tongue. Okay, so this is for your hypoglossal nerve, and that finishes your cranial nerve examination. I hope you are getting it, and if you are missing out on something, please feel free to ask. Then you have your sensory examination. Then in sensory examination, we have superficial sensations, deep sensations and cortical sensation. Superficial sensations and deep sensations are usually checked, but the cortical sensation is actually a part of your neurological examination. Superficial sensation means you are checking on your superficial touch, temperature and pain. Okay, touch, temperature and pain. And these sensations are checked from your impaired side to the normal side. Means if I am having a loss of sensations in my distal hand, then we should start from distal to proximal direction rather than from proximal to distal direction. Okay, so from the site of impaired sensation, we go towards the normal part. Got it? And it has to be followed in a dermatomal pattern. We all know we have dermatomes throughout the body, so we have to check according to the dermatome that is there in the body, and in that dermatome also we should precisely try to touch in the middle of that dermatome, because at the edges we can have overlapping of the dermatome. With the cotton whisk or with a fingertip, do not stroke or do not tickle. Okay, just touch, and that has to be in a milder form of pressure, because if you are going to give too much of pressure, then you are going to elicit, you are going to check on the pressure sensation, which is the posterior column sensation, not the superficial sensation, not carried by your spinothalamic tracts. Okay, so when we are checking on the spinothalamic tracts, we have to give the gentle pressure. Okay, sorry, gentle touch, not even pressure. Same for the temperature. You can use tuning fork in the initial phases, And later on you can have more precise, in which you take 2 test tubes, which is the ideal way to test temperature. You have 2 test tubes, one ranging from 40 to 45 degrees temperature and another is from 5 to 10 degrees. But beyond this you elicit the painful response. For the pain checking sensations, you can have the pin, all pin, which has a blunt end and a sharp end, and you go from the site of impaired sensation to the normal sensation, and you touch from the sharp side or the blunt side and ask the patient whether the patient can feel something or not. Sorry, you don't have to actually ask. I forgot to tell you that you have to see whether the patient in the very beginning explain the whole procedure to the patient and ask the patient if the patient feels something. Then the patient has to say yes or start counting. Okay, so whenever the patient feels that he's being touched, either he should say yes each time or he should start counting. You don't prompt any question, because that actually activates the patient, that actually tells the patient that yes, something is being done to you and you have to answer something. So you don't have to do that. Please explain the procedure from the very beginning. Although the examination sounds very easy, but when you actually go into the practical form of it, then it becomes little tricky, because it varies from person to person. Maybe the patient is not able to understand you, so you need to change your question, you need to change your approach towards the patient to how to assess it. Okay, so this is for your superficial sensations. For the deep sensations, you have your position sensation, you have kinesthetic sensation, you have your vibratory sensations, and you have your pressure sensations. For the position sense, what you usually do, keep your touch, tactile stimulus minimal. So suppose we are going from the distal to the proximal joint. I am taking the example of the distal joint. Suppose this is my distal joint, this is up, this is down. Okay, so you are explaining to the patient, this is up, this is down. Ask the patient to close the eyes, move it in a random fashion and stop it in any way. And when you stop, you have to explain to the patient, whenever I stop the movement, you have to tell me where the joint is lying. Okay, whether it is in up position or in down position. So the same protocol is followed from the distal to the proximal joints, in the upper limb, in the lower limb. Okay, kinesthetic sense means that you are moving one side of the joints and the patient is being asked to perform the same kind of movement at the same angle on the opposite side. Okay, so this is kinesthetic sensation. Vibratory sense, you use a tuning fork, 128 or 256 Hertz is being used, and you put it on the various bony prominences and ask for the vibratory response from the patient. Pressure response, same ways as checked in superficial touch. The only difference is that you are putting pressure. Got it? Then we have your cortical sensation. So cortical sensation means that perception of those things are there in your brain, like stereognosis, graphesthesia, barognosis, tactile localization. These and sensory inattention. I will not tell sensory inattention because altogether it's a different entity. Okay, so the basic ones are this. Stereognosis, like we checked in tactile agnosia. You are giving something, for example a pen, you ask the patient to close the eyes, give that object in the hand, what it is used. This is your stereognosis. For graphesthesia, you draw something. Don't draw the confusing don't draw the confusing figures, numbers or alphabets in the hand, in the palm. You draw it, patient's eyes are closed and patient has to identify what it is. This was a kind of game we used to play when we were small. Okay. Then we have barognosis. Barognosis is pressure sensation. So you give two different weights in the hands and ask the patient to close the eyes and identify which one is heavy, which one is lighter, or compare the two weights. So patient has to answer according to it. Then you have your tactile localization. Tactile localization means that you are touching at different aspects of the body and patient has to identify where the patient is being touched. Okay. So this is your sensory examination. Now coming to the motor examination. In motor examination, first and foremost thing that we check is your tone. Okay, tone is the feel that the muscle gives when it is being touched or moved. So for checking the tone, we have the palpation methods, we have lift and drop methods, we have passive movement method. So if we feel on palpation that the muscle is flabby and loose, we say it is flaccid. If it is seen to be little tight and stiff, it is said it is hypertonic. Okay, but to confirm it, then we do the passive movements. Passive movement, if the resistance that is being offered by the limb is getting increased with the velocity of the movement, then it is spastic. Whereas, and if it is given in one group of muscle, like when you are moving, only the agonist or the antagonist is giving you the resistance, then it is known as spasticity, which is of clasp knife. If both the group, agonist as well as the antagonist, are giving the resistance and non-dependent of the speed of the movement, then it is known as rigidity, which is of lead pipe and cogwheel. This cogwheel is intermittent and the lead pipe is continuous. Okay, so now this spasticity is graded on the basis of modified Ashworth scale, in which we have 0 to 4 grade, no increase, slight increase in the end range, 1 plus is increased in less than half of the range, then 2 more marked throughout the range, grade 3 the patient has more marked and the passive movement becomes very difficult to perform, and 4 that the limb is fixed in flexion or extension. This is your modified Ashworth, according to which we quantify this spasticity. Then sometimes we know that in case of stroke patients we develop the synergy pattern, flexion synergy or extensor synergy, although it is very difficult to find the pure pictures of flexors or extensor synergies. So we see either the combinations of the two in both the upper limbs as well in the lower limbs. So you can have voluntary motor control grading for that, or you can have the Brunstone voluntary grading for that. Okay, so that is a different grades and different assessment within the synergy patterns. In such cases, we check for the motor movements within the synergy, that how much control and how much the patient is able to move within the synergy and out of the synergies. Okay, or otherwise if the patient is not having such issues of spasticity, then you apply that plain MMT, Oxford Manual Muscle Testing. Okay, we all know it's 5 grades. Then you check for your muscle tightness. We know that in the upper limb, shoulder adductors are common for tightness, elbow flexors are common for tightness, shoulder internal rotators are common for tightness, elbow flexors, wrist and finger flexors, all these muscles. Same way in our lower limb, hip flexors, knee flexors, adductors, internal rotators, ankle plantar flexors, they have a tendency to go for tightness. Then next we have our reflex testing. So reflex testing includes your superficial reflexes, deep reflexes, and we have pathological reflexes. Superficial reflexes we know, corneal reflex, anal reflex, cremastic reflex, and we have abdominal reflex, upper quadrant, lower quadrant, we have plantar response testing. So I am not going into the detail because of the time constraint. You may find it boring because the time gets elongated, but you can revert back to me, I'll explain to you. Just because of the time issues, I'm just keeping it short. Then you have deep reflexes, you know, biceps, triceps, supinator, ankle and knee. Okay, then we have certain pathological reflexes which are seen in case of spasticity, like your Hoffman reflex. Okay, you have Wartenberg sign. You have palmomental reflex. Palmomental reflex, when you are pressing of the palm, you are seeing the response in the response in the mouth. Okay, you have your Hoffman reflex, where when you are in case of spasticity, upper motor neuron lesion, when you are flexing the distal DIP of finger, of your ring finger, of your middle finger, so you are seeing the gross flexor movement of all the digits. Then you have your Wartenberg sign. So what you are doing is you are keeping the hand like in this position and you are putting the resistance into extension. So you are looking for the extensor response of the thumb. That is again a sign indicating your upper motor neuron lesion. Then you have your testing of balance and coordination. For that you have your static balance testing and dynamic balance testing. Static means that you are maintaining the patient in certain position like sitting, standing, tandem stance, single leg stance with eyes open and eyes closed, and you are checking whether the patient is able to maintain the balance or not. You have Berg balance test also for this that you can incorporate. Then you have dynamic balance testing, for which you check that whether the patient is able to move out of the positions. If the patient is reacting well, you can check with the perturbations with eyes open, eyes closed. Then you have your coordination testing. For coordination testing, we have a set of equilibrium and non-equilibrium tests that is there in Sullivan also. The students who are interested can refer back to it, and there is a lot more long list. Okay. In coordination, you have non-equilibrium and equilibrium. Non-equilibrium means that the patient is not in standing position. Okay, so the strategies are not required. So it can be alternate pronation, supination, foot tapping. You can have finger nose test, heel to shin drag test, rebound phenomena. Rebound phenomena is different, but you check it in the case of your non-equilibrium test. Then you have your equilibrium test. Equilibrium test means that the patient is standing and you are checking for the response of the patients. So there you can have the Romberg sign, maintaining balance with eyes open, eyes closed. Then you have your tandem walking, walking on toes, walking on heels. Then this was the coordination test. Then you can have the gait assessment. Gait assessment takes a lengthier time, but on an initial basis, what you can see is if the patient is ambulating, what kind of gait the patient is moving into. Like the patient is having any lurching kind of gait, is the patient is scissoring, is the patient is walking on the toes, is the patient is doing circumductory kind of gait, is the patient is shuffling in its gait. So that indicates the kind of gait or the issues that the patient can be suffering from. Apart from that, you can have the elaborated assessment in terms of the step length, stride length, cadence, and the base of support, the associated trunk and arm movements. All those things can be assessed separately. Then apart from these two important things that you can see is the type of bladder and bowel. So the patient has which kind of bladder? Patient has flaccid bladder or hypertonic bladder, or autonomous bladder or automatic bladder. What kind of bladder and bowel function that the patient is having. And the last thing that the patient is being checked on is functional capabilities. So you can incorporate your functional independence measure, that is the basic tool that you can apply to the patient and check the amount of function which is being performed by the patient according to that scale in different activities like dressing, toileting, turning, sitting, all those functions. Okay, ambulations, toileting activities. So all the functional activities can be evaluated on functional independence measure. So that was the basic, very basic neurological examination. Hope you have understood something out of it so that you can read on to it. And if anybody is interested, please feel free to revert back to me. I am very happy to answer any of the questions. Thank you.